I never imagined that opening my garage door would set off the craziest feud of my life. That night, instead of an empty driveway, I found my neighbor's SUV parked inside as if she owned the place, and the smug look on her face told me she had no intention of moving it. What started as one act of entitlement would explode into chaos, a courtroom battle, a viral sensation, and the most unbelievable revenge my neighborhood had ever witnessed. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just a simple mistake. Maybe she got confused. Maybe she thought she was parking in her own space. But as I stood there in the fading evening light, staring at her SUV inside my garage like it had always belonged there, that hope began to crumble. I walked over calmly, keeping my voice polite, and asked her to move it, thinking the problem would be over in seconds. Instead, she turned to me with a smirk that still burns in my memory, folded her arms across her chest, and declared that the garage was now hers. She said the HOA rules gave her the right to take over unused spaces while the owners were away, and since I had been out of town, she decided mine was fair game. For a moment, I laughed, because the idea was so ridiculous, it almost sounded like a bad joke. But then I looked into her eyes, cold, stubborn and unshaken, and I realized she wasn't joking at all. She truly believed she could take my property, twist the rules in her favor, and get away with it. I stood frozen, torn between shock and anger, wondering how someone could be so bold, so entitled, so utterly shameless. And in that instant, I knew the truth. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a neighborly dispute. This was the beginning of something much bigger. A battle I never asked for, but one I was suddenly forced to fight. The next few days turned into a nightmare I never imagined. I thought maybe, after sleeping on it, she would realize how absurd her claim was and quietly move the SUV. But instead, every time I stepped outside, there it was, sitting in my garage like a trophy she had stolen, while she strutted around the neighborhood acting as if she had won some invisible victory. She began spreading whispers to anyone who would listen, twisting the story into her own version of reality. According to her, I had abandoned my garage while I was away, and she had simply done the community a favor by putting it to good use. The audacity was staggering. But what shocked me even more was how confidently she delivered these lies, as if speaking them out loud would somehow make them true. Neighbors started approaching me, some curious, others skeptical, asking if it was really my garage, if I had maybe given her permission. Each time I showed them the deed, the paperwork, the proof. But proof didn't matter to her. She thrived on drama, on creating chaos so loud that truth got drowned out. And when I finally confronted her again, demanding she move the SUV, she laughed in my face. She said I could call whoever I wanted, the HOA, the police, even a lawyer, and none of them would take my side because, in her words, everyone already knows this garage belongs to me now. That sentence hit me harder than anything else. It wasn't just entitlement anymore. It was a declaration of war. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I stopped seeing her as just an annoying neighbor. I began to see her for what she really was, an enemy who had crossed the line and underestimated me completely. And as I stood there, staring at that SUV locked inside my garage, I made myself a silent promise. She thought she had cornered me. She thought she had already won. But what she didn't realize was that this was just the beginning, and I was already planning my first move. The morning sun hit my driveway like a spotlight, and there she was, Karen, already in position, pacing back and forth like a predator circling her prey. Her hair was frizzy, her face red, and she held her phone like a weapon, calling anyone who might side with her in this imaginary battle. I opened my front door slowly, just to see the full effect of her theatrics. She launched into her performance immediately, screaming about the injustice of my actions, waving her arms as if she could physically take the SUV back with sheer force. Then, as if on cue, a small crowd of neighbors began gathering. drawn by the commotion, curious about what would unfold next. Some laughed quietly behind their hands. Others pulled out phones, capturing every second, knowing this was a scene worth saving forever. Karen's meltdown reached new heights. She called the HOA president, demanding immediate intervention, claiming that the entire neighborhood had conspired against her. When the HOA president told her, calmly but firmly, that she had no claim and must step aside, she erupted. She screamed accusations of theft, kidnapping, and conspiracy, her words bouncing off the walls of my house like ricocheting bullets. The contractors, who had returned to check on the fence, couldn't hide their amusement as she tried to physically block them from working. Every attempt she made only drew more attention. Neighbors set up lawn chairs like it was front-row seating to a theater show, phones recording, children mimicking her shrieks in exaggerated voices. It was no longer just a property dispute. It had become the spectacle of the year, a public performance of entitled hysteria, and everyone except Karen was entertained. She tried bribery next, offering money to release her SUV. First a few $100s, then thousands. I smiled, refusing, telling her she seemed to love my garage so much that the car could stay behind the fence indefinitely. The crowd roared with laughter at every exchange. Even the contractors chuckled, shaking their heads in disbelief. She escalated further, attempting to involve the police again. Officers arrived, looked at the situation, and politely explained she had no legal claim to my property. Her face contorted in rage, disbelief, and humiliation simultaneously. She shouted about civil rights, community justice, and how she would ruin me if necessary. Every threat fell flat. Every plan she made collapsed spectacularly, and the crowd's laughter grew louder. By midday, the fence was nearly complete. Locked gate installed. The SUV, once a symbol of her entitlement, now sat trapped, gleaming helplessly behind steel and wood. And in that moment, I realized something beautiful. This wasn't just a personal victory anymore. It was a lesson, a public display, a story that the entire neighborhood, and soon the internet, would never forget. Karen's meltdown had become more than a tantrum. It was an epic saga, a spectacle that highlighted exactly what happens when entitlement meets someone who refuses to back down. By the afternoon, word of the garage showdown had spread like wildfire. Neighbors who hadn't seen the morning chaos arrived, phones in hand, eager to witness what had already become legendary. Karen, still screaming and gesturing wildly, had no idea that every tantrum, every accusation, and every failed attempt to reclaim her SUV was being recorded by half the neighborhood. Someone live-streamed the entire spectacle. Within hours, clips appeared online, shared across Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Memes erupted instantly. Karen's frizzy hair, her desperate gestures, her wild accusations, all captured in perfect comedic timing. People from outside the neighborhood joined the conversation. Comments poured in. Laughter, disbelief, jokes, and nicknames. It wasn't long before the media caught wind. Local news segments featured clips, national morning shows picked up the story, and headlines read, "Garage hostage drama, neighborhood feud goes viral." Karen's fury only grew, even as her humiliation became global. She tried to spin the story in her favor, calling reporters, posting on social media, claiming conspiracy, corruption, and theft. But every clip, every video showed the reality. Her SUV trapped behind a legally constructed fence, her tantrums documented, and her claims collapsing under the weight of evidence. The neighbors were delighted. People stopped me in the street to congratulate me, handshakes, high fives, even drinks to celebrate. Karen, meanwhile, became the living embodiment of humiliation. Her presence on the street drew snickers, whispers, and sometimes outright laughter. Children imitated her screams. "My garage now!" They ran around pretending to be trapped behind imaginary fences, copying her wild gestures. The HOA, now desperate to restore order and their own credibility, issued formal statements. Karen's bogus claims were publicly rejected, and the board enacted strict new rules. No borrowing other people's property, no more disputes over personal garages without consent. Nancy, her loyal sidekick, began distancing herself. Friends and neighbors quietly stopped supporting Karen, realizing her antics were now social suicide. Karen wasn't done yet. Determined to reclaim her SUV, she attempted yet another stunt, sneaking to the fence at night with bolt cutters, whispering furiously, hoping to rescue her car. Floodlights triggered, alarms blared, neighbors poured into the streets once again. She froze, caught red-handed, her desperation broadcast to the entire neighborhood. Police were called. A formal warning was issued. Any more trespassing attempts would be criminal. Karen screamed, ranted, and stomped, but nobody was listening anymore. By now, the saga had a nickname, the Garage Bandit. Social media exploded with clips, memes, and endless commentary. I realized this was the perfect moment. With the evidence compiled, I worked with a tech-savvy neighbor to edit a cinematic video of the entire ordeal. The final cut included Karen parking illegally, every meltdown, every failed legal claim, every ladder slip, slow-motion drama shots, dramatic music, and even a mock narrator. In a world where entitlement knows no bounds, one man dared to fight back. I posted it online. The video went viral within hours. Millions watched, memes multiplied. People laughed, shared, remixed, and the legend of the garage hostage situation spread far beyond our small community. Karen tried to sue for defamation, but every clip was raw, unedited, undeniable proof of her own actions. The HOA had to hold emergency meetings, voting rights suspended, threats of expulsion issued, businesses she frequented refused her service. Even Nancy, who once backed her, had disappeared from her side. And still Karen clung to delusion, convinced that somehow, some way, victory was still possible. Meanwhile, I had already begun planning the final act, a legal, undeniable, unassailable twist that would end this feud once and for all. But for now, the neighborhood laughed, cheered, and celebrated. Karen had become a living cautionary tale. Entitlement unchallenged was entertaining, but when challenged, it destroyed itself spectacularly. And the SUV, trapped, fenced, and fully documented, had become the symbol of that lesson. Weeks had passed since Karen's viral meltdown, but the saga wasn't over. I knew that to finally put an end to her antics, I needed an absolute, undeniable victory. I consulted my lawyer and local authorities, meticulously planning every legal step. The abandoned vehicle laws in our state were clear. If a car sat unclaimed, on private property for a specified period, with repeated written notices ignored, ownership could legally transfer to the property owner. I documented everything, every notice, every certified letter, every witness account, and every viral video was carefully organized. For 30 days, Karen was given official legal notice after notice, all ignored or rejected. Each time she screamed at the fence, refused. To sign documents or claimed fake HOA rules applied, I simply recorded it, ensuring the entire chain of events was airtight in case of a courtroom battle. Finally, the day of the court hearing arrived. Karen strutted in, smug, convinced she had a new lawyer, her cousin, who claimed he had read a few legal blogs. The courtroom was packed with neighbors, reporters, and curious onlookers, all eager to see how this legendary feud would end. The judge, experienced and unimpressed by theatrics, listened as Karen launched into her usual dramatic performance. Accusations of theft, corruption, emotional distress, and conspiracy. She waved fake documents, claiming rights to my property, while everyone in the gallery tried not to laugh. Her arguments collapsed under scrutiny. She had no legal claim. She had ignored every notice. She had abandoned her vehicle. When it was my turn, I calmly presented my case. Property deed, copies of every notice, text messages proving Karen's unauthorized use, and the viral videos, her meltdowns, failed stunts, and ladder slip included. The judge reviewed everything carefully. With a decisive slam of the gavel, the verdict was clear. Karen had no claim. The SUV legally became mine. Every attempt she had made, every tantrum, every delusion had failed. Karen's face drained of color. Her screams of injustice fell on deaf ears. Legally, there was nothing left for her to do. The gallery erupted in quiet applause, some neighbors laughing, others relieved to see the nightmare end. But the final twist wasn't just ownership, it was legacy. I announced that the infamous SUV, the star of the viral garage hostage saga, would be auctioned off. All proceeds would go to a local charity helping families struggling with housing insecurity. The announcement went viral immediately. People from across the state wanted a chance to own the legendary vehicle, not for the car itself, but for the story it represented. On auction day, my yard was packed. Laughter, cheering, and playful bids filled the air. Reporters covered the event live. Every bid climbed higher than expected, fueled by humor, spite, and the desire to participate in this historic moment. Karen showed up, of course, standing beyond the property line, screaming that the auction was illegal, that I was stealing her life, that I was a monster. But nobody listened. The law was on my side. By the end of the day, the SUV was sold for a staggering sum, and I personally donated every dollar to the charity in front of the cheering crowd. Applause, laughter, and celebration filled the neighborhood. Karen stood there trembling, eyes wide, realizing she had lost everything. Legally, socially, and now symbolically, her reign of entitlement was over. The HOA formally censured her, initiating the process to remove her from the community for harassment and endless drama. Even her allies, like Nancy, had disappeared. She had become a cautionary tale, unchecked arrogance meeting the iron wall of reality. The next week, Karen quietly packed her belongings, leaving in a borrowed sedan without even glancing at my house. The neighborhood erupted in applause as she disappeared down the street, her era of chaos officially over. I stood on my porch, sipping a cold drink, watching the moving truck fade from view. The fence remained strong, my property secure, the SUV gone, and the entire story documented in law, video, and memory. This was more than victory. It was justice served, comedy perfected, and a lesson etched forever. Entitlement may roar, tantrums may scream, but patience, planning, and a bit of cunning always win in the end. And as the sun set over the now peaceful neighborhood, I smiled, knowing the legend of the garage hostage saga would live on in stories, videos, memes, and laughter for years to come.